I'm Vanessa Beaver. I'm a therapist.
And I'm Sherry Reagan, and I'm a therapist and BCBA behavior analyst.
And we're here to talk about parenting during this pandemic.
Right, and specifically talking about just strong emotions that parents may be feeling at this time, which are causing just a lot of distress on how they feel about themselves and how maybe just the family members are feeling that distress on how people are expressing emotions right now. The two emotions that we're going to focus on today that we think are the most prevalent right now are anxiety and grief, the sadness. Vanessa, can you define anxiety for everyone?
Yeah, we've got the way that anxiety will manifest for people is just a general like restlessness, tension, feeling nervous, having a sense of impending danger, panic, having increased, we notice physically an increased heart rate, breathing rapidly, sweating, trembling. And then it can also cause us to just feel weak and tired, have trouble concentrating, feeling irritable, having trouble sleeping. Anxiety is also pretty related to like our GI, so you might have some just gastrointestinal problems. Also having difficulty controlling worry. It just gets really out of hand, and the thought stopping does not able to do any of that, and having an urge to avoid things that trigger anxiety. Anything else that maybe I missed? I think
Yeah, I think there's one way that I notice anxiety within myself is after like the days preceded, I noticed that maybe my jaws are aching, they're tight, my shoulders are tight, my neck's hurting. And I didn't recognize that I was having a lot of muscle tension for hours. And I'm sure there's some parents right now experiencing that too, doing homeschooling and sometimes the battles with the kids, trying to get them to adjust to the new academic tasks being done at home and everything being changed. So yeah, I think you covered everything about anxiety. As far as grief, how that shows up, it can show up in many ways, but grief in itself is just an experience of loss. And I think that we can say there's a lot of loss that we're experiencing right now. Loss of our daily activities, our extracurriculars, seeing our families. We just celebrated Easter. And there was a lot of grief around that. There's grieving about even just spring break and what maybe vacations that people had to cancel. Family members that they were going to see. So grief is experiencing this loss, and then the mourning part is just how we express that grief. And so grief can sometimes look like depression as well. I mean, deep sadness. Sometimes even prior to the deep sadness, there's levels of denial. Maybe some parents are in a state of like, I can't believe this is happening still, right? Like me, like for myself, after a month of being quarantined, I'm still surprised that we're still in this position and that there's no end date as far as when things will open up for us again. And so I'm still working with that denial, and I'm sure there are a lot of parents feeling that as well. And then just feeling guilty about their people's children and what they're not getting, especially a lot of parents whose kids were supposed to graduate this year, or just going from 8th grade to high school, and even kindergartners. This is their first year of school, and this is how they're experiencing it. They're not able to really complete the year. So it can show up, like I said, in a lot of different ways. And so we can talk today about just how we sit with that grief and how we manage it. So we touched on both anxiety and grief, and we wanted to talk about how sometimes anxiety shows up, and we can like it's very straightforward, like how Vanessa said, but sometimes it can show up as numbing. It can show up as us not wanting to feel, right? So this is just another way that we can express anxiety. It's also another way we express grief, avoiding, because it's such a deep and intense emotion. So I like this. I never heard of this concept of numbing as much until I listened to Brene Brown. And I really loved how she explained it and saying that it's not just the conscious choice of avoiding, but actually maybe unconsciously avoiding by numbing ourselves with overeating, with drinking. The sales of alcohol has gone up exponentially since this quarantine, and it is a form of numbing because we're having a hard time sitting with all those extreme feelings. um the it can also come Numbing can also be experienced through using substances, even just substance abuse, and binge watching. I think
Mhm.
that's a pretty common numbing behavior. And if we do it so much that interferes with our day-to-day life, then that's when we know that it is in fact truly like a numbing experience and not just a leisure experience that someone's choosing to engage in. And even sex, just engaging in a lot of sexual behavior is a behavior of numbing as well. And so the point of us talking about this today is just to bring some awareness about just, can we reflect as parents on our own behaviors and how we're engaging in some of these anxiety behaviors and grief behaviors, so that we're just bring more conscious awareness to just who we are and what we're doing. So did you have anything to say about that, Vanessa?
No, I think, like you said, the watching or like screen time and like being on our phones and whatever our escape route is, and that lack, like you said, that lack of awareness of it. Like ideally, when these things are done, and you're able to use them as healthy distractions for coping, right? Like at least with maybe watching a little movie at the end of the day. But when it's just this mindless thing that you go to escape everything and to really you know blunt the effects of all of the grief and the anxiety and the stress,
Right.
it starts to it's hard for you to then come back into your body and address those stressors.
Right, right. And it exacerbates the cycle of helplessness and hopelessness, because one thing that gets us through the day and feeling satisfied about our day is how productive we are. How well did we manage the things that we're supposed to manage as a parent, especially with all the homeschooling tasks that have been bestowed on parents out of nowhere. Nobody prepared for this, and so most parents um, that I've talked to are experiencing a lot of stress around that, feeling guilt around that, feeling some fear and anxiety around whether or not their children are given the right education to even be successful. Like thoughts are going way in the future, right? As far as like, I don't want my child to fall behind, right? And that's a real legit concern for them. And I've listened to that, and no matter what I think about, well, a couple months, is it going to set your child's tone for their college and graduation and whatnot? But that's where our minds go, and that's what anxiety does. And so the point of even having this conversation with everyone is to highlight how normal it is to fear
Mhm.
the future right now, because there's a lot of unknowns. And to highlight that the intent of this is not to make those fears go away, because I think that's not realistic, but just more about how do you manage the fears, and how do you sit with those fears, and how do you make choices in your day-to-day interactions with people and your family members, that you can look back and reflect at the end of the day as a positive exchange. So
Yeah.
in a nutshell, yeah, that's why we want to talk about these things, and that leads to, how do we address anxiety? What are some tips on how to reduce the levels of anxiety, how to get your body to get into more of a calm state? So
Hmm.
um, we have a list of tips.
Yeah.
Uh,
So first, should I start with basic needs? Is that a
yeah.
good place? Okay. So addressing your basic needs, like our physical activity, right? Like that's one of the antidotes to anxiety, because we need to be able to um, get some of this energy. If you have too much energy within you and you get some anxiety, it will just feel that much more out of hand for so physical activity, you're shooting for at least 3 to 4 times a week, 40 minutes, and that you're getting yourself sweating. So it's not always just a nice stroll, but that, you know, you're able to log on and maybe do a quick video or something where you're getting that physical activity, which is now even harder. Then the next was sleep. Sleep is very, very important. So regardless of if you can function on 6 hours, you're really the ideal, and what we would all benefit from is about 7 to 8 hours a night. And looking at the quality of sleep, right? Sometimes you can have 9 hours and feel totally tired the next day. It doesn't mean that, you know, you cut into that night. It's just, you know, that's one of the side effects of this. Like we talked about, is tiredness is is a way that anxiety manifests, as well as stress. Then we have nutrition. So what are we taking into our bodies? Are we, and most importantly, I think with that is just, are we able to eat regularly? Because our anxiety can definitely spin and heighten when we haven't eaten anything. It's just an indicator to your central nervous system that not all the needs are met. And so it gets harder to manage, you know, any difficult thoughts or feelings that come up at that time. With nutrition, the other important part is caffeine intake. So sometimes when we're trying to combat that fatigue and get pumped for the day and do all of our things we need to do that we might not feel very motivated to do, we can lean into some caffeine for help. But then it also has some secondary effects, especially related to anxiety. And then I think under basic needs and physical needs, we also wanted to highlight our need for routines and consistency and predictability, because like Sherry mentioned, anxiety is so future focused. And so routines and stability can kind of create those things that we're needing right now, some predictability to what our day is going to look like, both for yourself as a parent and for your children. What can they expect? And also, like, even looking at like productive time versus free time, and what are some reasonable expectations for that you're not just going to go from homeschooling to, you know, baking and then arts and crafts. Like, there needs to be some down and free time for both you and your children in there as well.
And some flexibility with the routine, because you may build this beautiful schedule, and your child has a different idea of how things are going to go. Children are experiencing grief and anxiety at the same time, and so you may be managing more behavioral problems, or you might have a resurgence of old behaviors that have come back, or regressions. And so I mentioned being flexible with the schedule, because those needs are going to need to be addressed for you to have some more fluency with your schedules, and that's okay. And I think parents can give themselves that permission to let them not have a perfect day with schedules, right? There's a lot of anxiety of maybe if you don't get everything done, that there is some failure, when in reality you're just working on different things, and you weren't able to know or to put that in the schedule. It's not like you're going to put in a schedule, this is a time for him to have a tantrum, right? So I think it's just being very kind and flexible during that. And I also wanted to mention with anxiety, the reason why we talk so specifically about these biological factors is because anxiety induces a biological response, and it is meant to be there for good reason. It's what's kept us alive all these years. It's what's prepared us to, as humans, to evolve into for evolutionary purposes, to where we are today. It's what's kept us alive, right? So having anxiety is not necessarily, Yeah, it's a survival. So you have a flight or fight or freeze response, and that's supposed to be there. That's why we were able to run away from the saber-toothed tiger, because we had this really strong physical response, this pump of adrenaline, the cortisol. The problem right now is that it was always intended to be released and then resolved, because we have the psychosocial um, components of what's happening during this pandemic. It's causing our body to stay in that fight or flight or freeze state chronically versus just like having the release and resolve. And that's when parents are struggling, when they have the chronic state of anxiety. So if you can address it by really trying to abate some of the physical needs of it through sleep, through the food, through caffeine intake, and with the physical activity. That's why you do need to get your heart rate going, because your body's in that I'm going to run from the saber-toothed tiger stage. So you're doing those things so that you can be in your more um, cognitive brain versus your primitive brain. So just a little background on why these basic needs are so important. And like what Vanessa's saying with creating a routine, we're humans, and even just from an evolutionary point, we're used to routine. We're used to the sun coming up. We're used to doing this at this time, and when the sun goes down, we do this at that time. So the more that you can do that for yourself, since kids are not in school, and perhaps a lot of parents aren't working, that you can kind of emulate that so that your nervous system can relax a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, as far as grief work, we talked about how it can show up in some different ways as far as guilt and shame, sadness, depression, avoidance. I think as far as
Anger.
anger, yeah, especially in children, it shows up in for as anger and irritability. Both anxiety and grief can show up that way. Helplessness. As far as like tips on how to address grief, one is to acknowledge that it's happening, right? I think we can go through the denial, but even having that conscious awareness of I am denying right now because this is hard for me to accept, that in itself is an intervention. Grief is a complex psychological response at times, right? It's not so straightforward. It can go back and forth from depression to just guilt, back to depression, back to denial, and it can cycle itself in many different ways. And so giving yourself that acceptance of your experience will help you ride those waves in a way that's mentally more healthy and stabilizing. Now, point of this conversation is not to give you tips so that you automatically feel better. I think that's not realistic right now during this crisis. But what is realistic is just how do we sit with those strong negative emotions, and we want it to be where we can notice them and observe them from a distance so that we're not so controlled by the strong emotions, because at times when we make decisions based on our emotions, we're not coming from our higher cognitive self, we're coming from a very primitive place. And as a parent, we're put in a position where we feel very responsible on how our children experience the day through by their interactions through us, right? We're supposed to be the rock for them. And so it's impossible unless we can allow ourselves to be ourselves and feel those feelings. And I know that may not be the solution everyone wants to hear, because they want to hear, maybe I just don't want to feel this way.
Mm.
And I would encourage you to even acknowledge that emotion of like, I'm resenting having to feel this way. And for some miraculous reason that seems to work, right? Just acknowledging the experience helps us be able to sit with it and manage it and get through it and take it step by step, and take our daily tasks step by step. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add for grief?
I think, like you said, for many reasons, it's this very loaded and powerful intervention, that awareness of self, and that awareness that it allows for the distance from what's happening to us internally. Um, And I think with grief, it can also maybe give indicators for what areas to take care of ourselves, right? Like you said, I'm feeling really resentful that this is all happening, and I'm resisting it right now. So maybe that can give you some clues into what spaces are probably going to help you, alleviate some of the tension that comes up when that feeling arises.
Right, right. Um, as far as like the kinds of thoughts that come up when you're experiencing these extreme emotions of sadness and grief and anxiety, um, the thoughts that come up can be very self-deprecating at times as far as how we experience ourselves as parents. It can even be you might even have some harsh thoughts about the people around you, right? There's some cabin fever happening, and there's a lot
Yeah.
of family time. You may not feel like you like your spouse or even like your children sometimes, and I think that it's okay to acknowledge that those feelings come up. It's your way that your body's processing all these feelings and really resenting some of the harsh realities of how you're experiencing just what's happening. And so I really want to encourage just some self-compassion
Mm,
for yourselves as parents when it comes to the thoughts that come up. And if you are able to slow your nervous system down and do some of the biological interventions, you'll have a better chance of even acknowledging that you're having these feelings, which
mm,
in return stop you from behaving and acting out on it, right? And so thoughts usually lead to feelings, which lead to behaviors. If we're wanting to change how we interact so we don't feel so guilty at the end of the day because we yelled at our child or we had our own kind of maybe parent tantrum, which
mm,
happens, right? So I think if we can slow down in that regard, we have more control on how we act. And so at the end of the day, I want to encourage parents not to think about just how much they got done, but how they experience the relationships and how other people experience the relationships with you as parents.
mhm,
Sometimes we need to let go of maybe everything we thought we should do and really focus just on being present and dealing with whatever comes up during the day, so again, highlighting that some kids are going to be having a lot of behavioral regression, behavioral outbursts, crying, maybe even avoidance when you're trying to get them to do things because this is not what they know of to be school and they may not see you as a teacher. um, and then after you play the role of teacher, then you go back into the role of parent of like, you need to do your chores, you need to pick up after yourself, you need to eat, you need to shower. So it's a lot that our children are taking on right now as well. And so the self-compassion piece is so important because it's hard on you as a parent to have to hold that role, both roles. It's hard not having normal outlets. It's hard for your kids in the same capacity. So letting yourself, if you need to have a break, have a break. If you need to take a nap, take a nap. And looking at yourself as someone who makes mistakes and that being okay is going to help you get through this, right? But when you look at yourself as saying, I made a mistake, now my child isn't going to learn and do well, that's a normal thought. But I encourage you all to think about how does that make you feel and respond when your child doesn't want you to do or want to do what you're asking. Do you have a extreme reaction where you want to be controlling? Do you want to make it happen, make your child's will your will so that you can essentially just address that fear, right? When you can really just address that fear on your own. You really can. And the point is that all these tips are ways to empower yourself as parents.
mhm.
Um, in social supports, right? What do you think about social supports?
I mean, social supports it look very different right now, right? Maybe you have other adults. Maybe you're a single parent. If you have other adults around you, um, you know, they can serve as one, just like meeting practical needs. Hey, I need a break. Can you take over? Or it can be the emotional support that we're needing. Hey, everybody's like the kids are asleep. Can we talk? I had a really rough day. Or if
Mhm.
you're not able to do that with the people that you are physically with, reaching out to that friend who can listen and and asking for what we're needing, right? Hey, I'm just needing someone to talk to right now. I don't need advice, or I don't need you to help me fix it. Um, because our ability to connect with others right now is crucial, and it's also somewhat impaired by this situation that we're in, because we are in that like more heightened stressful, so we're not feeling as safe. And we know in order to be able to connect with people, we have to have trust and safety. And when our own safety is being jeopardized kind of on a daily basis, whether you know you have your job, or you know that they're furloughing employees at your company, or all of these big basic needs that you have are kind of um, being challenged right now. And so even if you wanted to connect with someone and you're trying to access social support and you're trying to be there, but you're not feeling any of it and you're feeling distant from it, that's back to that awareness. And how can you get that social support from others when you're.
Right. Right. And then with social supports, I've seen people do it in different ways. I've seen people ask other parents to join them for Zoom happy hours. I've seen some parents even just put posts up on like our next door. We have a next door website, so people in the neighborhood can all kind of keep each other apprised on what's happening with around them. People will just, I've seen parents post on there and just be like, I'm really struggling with this online distant learning platform. Anyone else having that issue? Like just reaching out even to people if they're just church if they're into going to church or their spiritual affiliation, reaching out to them, looking online for parent support groups, looking just to family members, and just like Vanessa was saying, like talking to other people in your home as far as like, hey, can I talk to you after this? The kids are down, can I have some time with you? Just all these little actions that you take just to connect and to vent and to release is not necessarily just to problem solve. That's a great byproduct of it, but it's just more or less of just sharing an experience with someone, which can make a world of difference. So a lot of times anxiety and grief can lead to isolation, and you go into that numbing stage and you don't want to feel for a while. And the point of this is not to say don't do that. It's just, can you be aware of it? And can you make a choice if it's getting in the way of your values and what you need to get done? So if you stay up every night till 4 o'clock in the morning binge watching because you don't want to feel anything, and maybe that's the first, from like 10 o'clock on is the first time of the day that you actually had to yourself, but you have a lot of things that you need to do. And if you do that every single day and you never get anything that you want to get done, I encourage people to take a step back and ask themselves, is it worth it? Is there another way that you can experience those emotions? Can you put a time cap on how long you're going to numb yourself? Because sometimes you do need to numb yourself a little bit, right? It's just so overwhelming. Like, let yourself be numb, but just do it consciously, right? And challenge yourself a little bit and saying, okay, I'm going to turn it off right now, because I know tomorrow I will not be able to get up and start my day and do the homeschooling because I'm going to be too tired, or I'm going to be super irritable, and eating this big pint of ice cream is good in the moment, but how is it going to affect my sleep? How is it going to affect me when I wake up? There's so much science behind just like even just nutrition on how you start your day with breakfast. What do you choose to put in your body, and how is it going to affect your mood? Our mood is really going to be affected by so many things. If there's one way or a couple of ways that you can take control, then why not do that? That is a coping strategy, is control what you can control right now and accept the things that you can't. And these biological things, some of these coping strategies, or all of these coping strategies that we talked about, are things that you actually have control over. And that's empowering in itself. and that will help you get through this stressful time. So again, it's not to feel good. It's just about how to get through as gracefully as we can.
And this idea that we have to nurture this other part of ourselves, like we're used to like providing, right, and our children, providing the basic needs, but that there's a need for the emotional care too, and there's a need to release stress. That's an important takeaway from this. Emotions need to move through your body, so they need to have an outlet. And that can look in many different ways, right? It can look like socially connecting and logging on with a friend. It can look like engaging in some creativity for yourself. It doesn't mean that just arts and crafting is for the kids. Like, um, it can, and we'll probably put up like a list of different things that might be helpful.
Yeah.
But even like doing I think, Sherry, you mentioned nature baths and going outside, as being this like this need that we have. It's both biological, psychological, to be outdoors in some nature.
Right. And to there's been some research done on nature baths, going out into the forest bathing in
Mm,
Asia. And there's been a lot of positive outcomes that is yielded just from people taking 20 minutes of a walk in a nature like oriented space. So not necessarily walking through like industrial buildings. It's like
your neighborhood.
yeah, unless your neighborhood is like very nature inspired. You want to get yourself around the greenery. You want to get yourself get a good dose of that for it to really increase dopamine in our brain, which is the feel good chemical. And we need a little bit of that right now. So, again, this is just one more easy way that you can schedule something into your day to add a little relief. And not one of these coping strategies are going to are just going to quote fix this issue. It's going to be a compilation of many different strategies that you try, and a lot of times in combination, right? You have to do more than just one throughout the day. You have to practice throughout the day to hang in there. So another really positive strategy is to practice mindfulness, practicing yoga. Just those two specific things, a lot of research has shown that it can reduce a lot of stress response in our bodies. And not necessarily just as a reactive strategy to some sort of kind of high stressor, but more as something ongoing, like a dosage of medication. So it would be something I encourage that you do on the regular, not just once a week and expect the kind of same positive outcomes. And I think the point of us talking about this today is just, do you have even just access to tools to even try things? And that's what we're trying to do, is just disseminate options for you. And we want to be available to parents who have questions or concerns or even just frustrations of saying you recommended this and it didn't work, right? Like having that outlet. I think getting support is also, if you need to, working with a therapist that you can talk to through telehealth, if you so choose to do that, or being part of just like we said earlier, like parent support groups where you're able just to vent and get some of these things off your chest. And so I hope that um, in the next week or so that we open up our own parent support group so that we can offer those opportunities for parents to get together and talk about specific topics, or just have just time to talk about anything, right? And so we're going to give out our email information, our contact information, and more information about the parent support group, and give you access to slides summarizing all the things that we talked about today so that you can reference it later. So we hope that you can take this information, you can utilize it, and that we can be a valuable resource to you, as we all just need to support each other during these hard times, where it more than any time that I've experienced in my life, this is a time where coming together is more pertinent than it's ever been. We are all connected and we all need to work together to get through this. And I want to thank you for giving us your time and for listening to us talk about these strategies and these big emotions. And I hope that I hope that anyone who wants to reach out feels like they can.
Yes, well said, Sherry. Thank you guys, and take care of yourselves. And hopefully, we'll be able to check in soon.
All right. Have a good day. Bye, guys.